Stop calling me Dad. That's what Beckett said. Those 4 words. No warning. No build-up. Just a dull, casual bomb drop during breakfast like it was any other Tuesday. I remember the spoon in my hand paused mid-air. Cereal went soggy. Maisie, his little sister, didn't even blink. She just kept drawing swirls into the condensation on her juice glass. Mara stood at the counter, her back to me, stiff as a statue, and didn't say a single word. Not one. Beck, I said, chuckling, thinking maybe he was joking. What? You're not my real dad, he said. Mom told me. Silence. You know that sound when everything in you falls? Not out loud, but inward, like a slow, collapsing tunnel? That's what it felt like. Every inch of me caved in all at once. I turned to Mara. Still no words. She just tightened her grip on the countertop, eyes locked on the empty sink. I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe Beckett misunderstood. Maybe this was some sick middle school prank and he got it off a show. Maybe Mara would turn around and say, that's not what I meant, or he got it wrong, or anything. But she didn't. Instead, she walked out of the kitchen, picked up her purse from the side table, and left. No coat. No explanation. Just out. I followed her to the porch, barefoot, heart thundering, asking the one question I shouldn't have had to ask after 12 years. Is it true? She stopped at the car door. Then she nodded. Not a word. Just that tiny motion. Just that one, silent truth, like a quiet knife to the chest. And I swear to you, in that exact moment, the entire timeline of my life, 12 years of it, shattered into dust. I don't even remember how I ended up in my car. I just remember sitting in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel with shaking hands, trying to breathe like a normal person. I couldn't cry. Not yet. Not until I realized the radio was still playing the song that was playing the first time I held Beckett in the hospital. That's when the crying started. The ugly, gut-wrenching, gasping kind. I cried so hard I choked on it. I cried until the neighbors walked by and stared, then quickly looked away. I cried until the inside of my car fogged up. I cried like someone had died. Because in a way, someone had. The man I thought I was. The life I thought I had. Gone. Gone with a sentence from a kid who thought he was just being honest. And that was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driveway for hours, lights off, engine off, car slowly freezing around me. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. All I could hear was the echo of his voice. Stop calling me Dad. I must have replayed it 1,000 times in my head, like some cruel recording I couldn't delete. And her nod. That horrible, final nod. I kept wondering how long she'd been holding that truth hostage while I walked around this house like a fool, doing grocery runs, fixing the leaky faucet, ironing little shirts for a school picture day that apparently didn't even belong to me. Around 3 a.m., I went inside. The house was dark. Quiet. I tiptoed past their rooms like an outsider. It already didn't feel like my home anymore. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe Mara waiting up. Maybe a letter on the table. Maybe even a confession scrawled out on a napkin. But there was nothing. No note. No apology. Just her empty slippers left by the door like she still lived here with a clean conscience. By sunrise, I was sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the carpet, wondering how many more lies lived between those walls. I hadn't even processed the full weight of it yet, hadn't dared to, but something deep down, something ancient and cold, told me this was only the start of the fall. I called her. Not to yell. Not even to accuse. I just wanted to hear how she could keep something like this from me for 12 years. I needed to understand the mechanics of that kind of betrayal. But she didn't answer. Straight to voicemail. Again and again. I finally texted her just one line. Who's the father? No reply. Not that morning. Not that afternoon. Not that week. Instead, the answer came in a different form. 3 days later, I got a call from a man I'd never spoken to before. His name was Landon. Said it like I should know it. Like it had weight. Dorian, right? Listen. I think we need to talk. He sounded tired. Not guilty. Not angry. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from living with a secret that was never really yours to hold. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just sat there in my office chair, suddenly cold all over, staring at the photo of Beckett and Maisie taped to my filing cabinet. The one where we were all at the pumpkin patch last fall, smiling like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. A lie, in full color. Landon sighed. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said. I didn't even know for sure until recently. Mara, she didn't want to confirm it. Confirm what? I finally choked out. That Beckett's mine. Probably Maisie, too. He said it so flatly, so quietly, like it wasn't a nuclear sentence that would level everything I ever knew. And then he added something I'll never forget. She told me she was going to tell you soon. But I guess the kid beat her to it. I hung up. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there for a long time, staring at that smiling photo, trying to remember if it was even real, trying to figure out how many moments of my life were mine, and how many were just borrowed without my consent. That night, I didn't go home again. I drove 4 hours without knowing where I was headed. I ended up in a beach town we once visited early in our marriage. Off-season now. Everything closed. Boardwalk abandoned. The place where we took our second honeymoon, when Beckett was just a toddler. She said it was the happiest she'd ever been. I believed her. I found the same old motel, checked into the same room. I sat on the same bed. But this time, I sat alone. And everything about it felt like a joke I was too slow to get. You know what the cruelest part is? I still miss them. Beckett, Maisie, her. Even after knowing. Even after hearing it from the man himself. Even after 12 years of being lied to in my own home. I still miss them. Like a fool. I cried again. Different this time. Not loud. Not messy. Just slow and hollow. Like the tears were leaking out of something broken beyond repair. And I realized something in that moment. Something I hadn't been willing to admit yet. This story wasn't going to end with a neat apology. Or some redemptive conversation. No closure. No justice. This was going to get much worse before it got better. And I was far from the bottom. I stayed in that motel for 2 nights without telling anyone where I was. I didn't even take my phone charger out of the glove box. I let the battery die. No notifications, no texts, no false hope. Just silence. I think part of me hoped they'd come looking for me. Maybe Mara, maybe even the kids, but no one did. It was as if I had vanished and the world didn't even hiccup. On the second night, I walked the boardwalk again alone. I saw the bench where we once ate snow cones and watched seagulls steal fries from tourists. I remembered Beckett asking if birds had parents too. I told him, every living thing does. God, the irony of that. I don't think I've ever said something more unintentionally cruel in my life. That night, I had a dream, more like a nightmare, honestly. I was in our kitchen, cooking dinner like always. The kids were sitting at the table, coloring. Mara stood behind me, talking to someone, but her voice was muffled, like it was underwater. I turned around and saw Landon standing next to her, wearing my apron. My apron. He smiled at me and said, "You can go now." Then I woke up, drenched in sweat, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I nearly vomited from the panic. I left early that morning. I didn't know where to go, so I just drove. But something about not seeing the kids, my kids, or maybe not, was driving me insane. I told myself I wasn't ready, but the silence of not knowing was worse. So I went back home. Not to talk, not to argue, just to look at them again. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Mara's car. My heart started racing. The garage door was open, which was strange. She never left it open. I walked in through the side and stepped into the kitchen. And everything was gone. The photos, the magnets, the silly drawings. Every trace of our life together had vanished from the walls and counters. It felt like someone had burgled the soul out of the house. Even the family calendar that hung near the fridge was missing. The only thing left was a folded piece of paper on the kitchen island with my name written on it. I picked it up with shaking hands. It wasn't a letter, just a list. A literal list. Titled, "Next Steps for Separation, per our discussion." Except, we hadn't discussed anything. There were 6 bullet points. Arrangements for the kids. Temporary custody suggestions. Notes about her lawyer reaching out. 1 line about respecting space and emotional boundaries. And no signature. I stood there in that gutted kitchen, staring at this cold, administrative memo like it was some joke. We had built a life here. We had slow danced in that exact spot on New Year's Eve once while the kids slept upstairs. We used to make pancakes every Saturday on that same stove. I proposed to her in this house. And now she was treating me like an HR complaint she was filing away. I stormed into the living room and found the boxes. Labeled, packed, taped. Each one neatly marked with either my name or hers. As if she had rehearsed this whole thing. As if she'd known for years how it would end and had just been waiting for the right day to press the button. The worst part? The box labeled Dorian, keepsakes. Inside it were things I hadn't seen in years. My college hoodie. A mug I made for Father's Day when Beckett was 5, a hand painted with little stars and the words, "Best Dad Ever," and a bundle of cards, all tied together with a ribbon. I sat on the floor and opened them one by one. Every birthday, every anniversary, little notes the kids had written, every single one calling me Dad. And all of it now sat in a cardboard coffin she packed for me like a mercy kill. I didn't even hear the front door open. "Didn't think you'd come back this soon," she said from behind me. I turned around slowly. She stood there, arms crossed, like I had just walked in on her private moment. "I thought we were going to talk," I said. "You left." "I assumed you needed space," she replied, cool as ever. "So I got started." "Got started doing what?" "Erasing me." She didn't flinch. "We both know this was coming, Dorian. We were a shell. You just didn't want to see it." That line, that one burned more than anything else. Because I did see it. I saw the late nights she said were strategy meetings. I saw the text messages she always tilted her screen away for. I saw the emotional distance, the one she insisted was normal after kids. I just didn't want to believe what it all meant. I thought that's what love was, trusting even when it hurts. But trust doesn't mean anything when you're the only one holding it. I left without saying another word. I couldn't stay there. Not while she stood in the doorway of our home like she'd already replaced me in every frame. Later that night, I got a message from Beckett. Just one line. "Are you mad at me?" I stared at that message for over an hour before responding. Because how do you answer a child who may not even be your biological child, but still feels like your child in every way that matters? I typed back, "Never." And I meant it. But I also knew nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up on my brother's couch with the stiffest neck and the emptiest chest I've ever felt. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock in his kitchen. Tick, tick, tick. Every second reminded me that time was moving forward, whether I wanted it to or not. I didn't even tell Isaac why I was there. He opened the door at midnight, saw the look on my face, and just moved aside. No questions. No pity. Just that quiet understanding that only an older sibling can give. He left a blanket on the arm of the couch and went to bed like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. I stared at the ceiling, blinking slowly, still trying to process how my entire identity had been pulled out from under me like a rug. One day I was a husband, a father, a man with a family. The next, I was just some guy with a box of keepsakes and a lawyer's number written on a napkin. I finally checked my phone again. It had been buzzing for hours. Missed calls from my boss, 3 texts from my mom asking if I was okay, and 1 voice message from Mara I couldn't bring myself to play yet. But Beckett had messaged again. "Did you leave because of me?" That one cracked something wide open in my chest. I typed out a dozen replies. Deleted them all. Then, finally, I wrote, "I didn't leave because of you. I left because I was lied to. You're still my kid. No matter what." He replied instantly, "I want to see you. I don't care what Mom says." That sentence hit harder than anything Mara had ever done. Because as confused and hurt and young as he was, he still chose me. Maybe not because of biology. Maybe not because he fully understood what was going on. But because of the memories. The bond. The years. I picked him up from school the next afternoon without telling Mara. I just showed up like I used to. He walked out of those doors like nothing had changed, like his world hadn't been flipped upside down, and climbed into the car like it was the most natural thing in the world. I wanted to cry again, but I held it in. We went for ice cream. Middle of the day. Cold outside. Didn't matter. He sat across from me, swinging his legs under the bench, and stared down at his cone for a long time before finally speaking. "You know, Mom told me that you'd probably leave if you found out." I froze. "What?" I asked, trying not to sound like I'd just been punched. He nodded. "She said that's why we never talked about it. That you'd get angry. She said you always overreacted." I felt sick. Did she say that often? Only when I asked why I didn't look like you. I noticed in 2nd grade. I asked if I was adopted. She laughed and said not technically. Not technically. The words hit me like a steel bat to the chest. Mara had known this would blow up eventually. She braced for it. She'd even weaponized the idea of me being too emotional to stay. She'd laid the groundwork to paint me as unstable, even before I knew anything. That's when Beckett looked at me and said something I will never forget for the rest of my life. "You didn't overreact. You just loved too hard." That line broke me. I leaned over and hugged him so tightly he dropped his cone. He didn't even complain. He just hugged me back like he had never stopped believing I was his dad. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe fatherhood isn't DNA. Maybe it's cleaning up spilled milk without yelling. Maybe it's staying up all night to build a Lego castle because he asked nicely. Maybe it's remembering what nightmares he has and turning the hallway light on before bed. Maybe it's loving a child even after the world tells you he isn't yours. But then, things got complicated. Fast. When I dropped him off later that evening, Mara came outside. She wasn't alone. Landon was with her. He didn't speak. Just stood behind her like some kind of bodyguard, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "You had no right," she said coldly. I ignored her. Looked down at Beckett. "It's okay. Go on in." He hesitated. "Will I see you again?" "Always," I said. He nodded and walked inside slowly, dragging his backpack behind him. Mara waited until the doors shut, then stepped closer. "You're making this harder for everyone." I laughed bitterly. "You've got a lot of nerve. You think you're the victim in all this," she hissed. "You were never emotionally present, Dorian. You always wanted things neat and quiet and easy. You couldn't handle real life." "You mean the part where you slept with someone else and let me raise his kids?" I snapped. Landon stepped forward, but I held up my hand. "No. Let him hear it. Let him feel what I felt." Mara's eyes burned, but she said nothing else. She just turned and walked back toward the house, dragging Landon behind her like a dog on a leash. I stood on the curb until the porch light went off. And right then, in that dim silence, I knew. This wasn't going to end in court. This was going to end in war. I don't think you ever truly grasp how much you've lost until someone tries to tell your story for you. The next morning, I received an email from a lawyer. Not mine, hers. A professional, sterile message with a PDF attachment titled, "Temporary Custody Proposal." It was formatted like a brochure, filled with terms like parental transition, emotional stability zones, and minimizing stress through reduced exposure. But it wasn't until I hit page 4 that the real gut punch landed. Mara had written a personal statement. It wasn't even long, just 4 paragraphs. But in that space, she had rewritten history. According to her, I had been distant, passive, an emotionally withdrawn father figure who preferred structure over affection. Her words, not mine. And the kicker? She claimed I had agreed years ago to raise the kids regardless of their paternity, that I'd made a verbal commitment in a moment of compassion and had now regretfully abandoned that responsibility. I stared at those paragraphs so long the letters blurred. I read them again and again. I tried to remember when I'd supposedly made this commitment she referenced. There was nothing. No memory. No conversation. No agreement. Nothing. She was rewriting our lives, weaponizing the very silence I had once thought was just part of her personality. And the scariest part? It sounded believable. It sounded reasonable. If I hadn't lived it, I might have believed it myself. That afternoon, I drove to see my mom. I hadn't told her everything yet, just that Mara and I were separating and that things had been complicated. But I needed to talk to someone who still remembered the real version of me. The version that changed diapers, stayed up with feverish kids, built a crib in the middle of the night with missing screws and a YouTube tutorial. Mom made coffee and listened like she always did, calm, focused, unshaken. I sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around the mug, explaining everything. When I got to the part about the email, I showed her the document. She read it slowly, her lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. When she was done, she handed the phone back and said only one thing. "She's not just trying to hurt you. She's trying to erase you." I nodded, too drained to respond. Then Mom pulled out a small box from her hallway closet. She sat it down in front of me. "I was waiting until you asked," she said quietly. Inside were old photos, videos, snippets of life that Mara hadn't been able to delete. Pictures of me and Beckett at the zoo. A shaky video of Maisie taking her first steps toward me. Birthday cards. Handprints in paint. Little fingerprints on a Father's Day canvas that said, "You're my hero, Daddy." And then something else. A copy of an email Mara had sent to my mother 8 years ago. I had no idea my mom had saved it. It was about Beckett. He was sick at the time, croup or something. I had stayed up with him for 3 nights straight while Mara had gone on a work retreat. In the email, she wrote, "I feel guilty that Dorian does everything. He's so good with Beckett. Sometimes I feel like he's more of a real parent than I am." There it was. In her own words. 8 years ago, when the truth wasn't yet burning everything to ash. Back when she still had moments of clarity and honesty. I held on to that email like a lifeline. But the storm was only beginning. The next day, I received a message from an unknown number. No intro. No pleasantries. Just one line. "You don't know the full story. Attached was a photo. I clicked on it. It was a group picture. An old one. Mara, Landon, and two other men. One of them had his arm around her. Not Landon. Someone else entirely. And in the corner, barely visible but unmistakable, was a hospital name tag. My stomach dropped. The timestamp was just days before Beckett's birth. I stared at the image, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Why would someone send this? Who were these other men? And why did Mara never mention them? I wrote back. Who is this? No response. I wrote again. Who's the man with her? Still nothing. I showed the photo to Isaac that night. He squinted at it for a long time before saying, "That's not Landon. That guy looks nothing like the other one." He was right. So now there was a new question. A bigger one. Was Landon even the real father? Or was he just the one Mara chose to tell? It hit me like a freight train. What if she didn't know? What if she had no idea who the biological father was? What if this whole thing, this disaster, this war, this implosion, was all built on a foundation of assumption and selective memory? I sat there that night, staring at the walls of Isaac's guest room, realizing I had only scratched the surface of a truth that went far deeper than betrayal. This wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just dishonesty. It was chaos wrapped in control. And I had finally stepped into the eye of it. That night, I couldn't shake the photo from my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, the image was there, that group of four, grinning like they didn't have a care in the world. Mara sitting too close to someone who wasn't her husband, the hospital badge glinting from someone else's chest like a slap in the face. I zoomed in, again and again, trying to enhance details my tired eyes weren't catching. There was something off about the man in the back. He looked familiar, but not in the usual way, more like a face I'd passed once or twice but never expected to connect with this nightmare. The next morning, I asked my friend Jordan, who works in IT security, to help me trace the number that sent the message. He hesitated, but after I told him just enough to understand that it wasn't some petty breakup drama, he ran it. He called me back an hour later and said, "Dorian, are you sitting down?" The number belonged to a guy named Coulter Hensley. I hadn't heard that name in years. He was Mara's ex before me. A ghost from a life I thought she'd buried. I only knew of him because, early in our relationship, I'd once found a box of old letters in her closet. One of them was from him, sentimental, overwritten, and filled with bizarre ramblings about unfinished business. Mara laughed it off at the time and said, Coulter was a phase. He was poetic but unstable. Then she burned the letters. Literally. We had a small fire pit behind our townhouse back then. She made a show of throwing the box in and watching it burn. Now he was back. And he was watching. I messaged the number again. "Why now? What do you want?" Minutes later, the reply came. "You deserve the truth. She erased me. She can't do that again." I nearly dropped my phone. She erased him? What did that even mean? What part of this had I stumbled into? I didn't respond. I didn't know how. Instead, I got in my car and drove back to the place I swore I'd never return to again, the storage unit Mara and I had rented before we had kids. I still had the spare key. She probably thought I'd forgotten about it. Inside, everything was dust-covered and stale, like a time capsule left to rot. Old furniture, wedding decor, boxes marked baby clothes, and winter gear. I dug through it until I found a plastic tub labeled simply miscellaneous. That was always her way of hiding things she didn't want me asking about, labeling them with vagueness. At the bottom of that bin was a photo album I didn't recognize. No labels. Just loose pictures and a worn notebook tucked into the back sleeve. I sat cross-legged on the concrete floor and opened it. There they were. Mara and Coulter. Younger. Smiling. Dozens of them. Park photos, college house parties, even a couple of blurry hospital corridor shots. And then the real gut punch. An ultrasound. Her name on the printout. Dated 5 weeks before Beckett's birthday. I sat there, hands shaking, heart pounding in my throat. I flipped to the notebook. It wasn't a diary. It was more like a log. Mara's writing unmistakable. It detailed every visit, every test, every conversation with doctors. The entries started clinical but shifted halfway through into something unhinged. She wrote about uncertainty, about feeling cornered, about how Coulter was losing it, and how she needed to protect the outcome. The last entry chilled me to my core. Dorian will never know. He's perfect. He'll raise this child with love because he doesn't question. He trusts. I'm tired of fighting ghosts. I choose peace. I choose the story. I dropped the notebook. My fingers couldn't even grip it anymore. My brain was scrambling for air. This wasn't just a betrayal. This wasn't even just cheating. This was manufactured reality. A storyline she built piece by piece, knowing full well she had played God with my life. And Coulter? He wasn't just bitter. He was erased, cut out of history like a bad chapter. I left the unit with the album in my trunk. I didn't know where I was driving. I didn't even know if I should go to the police. Could I even do that? What crime was this? Fraud? Identity manipulation? Emotional homicide? Eventually, I stopped at a diner on the edge of town, one of those places with cheap coffee and even cheaper blinds. I slid into a booth and just sat there, staring at my reflection in the napkin dispenser. Who was I? Was I even a father? Had I ever really been a husband? A text buzzed in. It was from Mara. Stop digging. You're making this worse for everyone. That's when it hit me. She knew. She knew I'd find it. She knew exactly what was in that storage unit. She'd left it there on purpose, out of reach, but not out of existence. A failsafe. And now she was trying to regain control. But it was too late for that. I texted back. We need to talk. In person. No kids. Just you and me. She didn't reply. But I knew she would. Because if I had unearthed her deepest secret, then she would do anything to protect what was left of the lie. The next 2 days passed like the longest breath I've ever held. I didn't hear from her. No reply to my message. No calls. Just silence. Not the kind that's empty, the kind that prepares. You could feel something shifting under the surface, like the earth was about to crack and everyone was just pretending the tremor wasn't coming. I stayed at Isaac's, barely ate, barely spoke. I kept playing the same thoughts in my head like a cassette jammed on rewind. The photo of Coulter, the ultrasound date, Mara's notebook entries, he trusts. I'm tired of fighting ghosts. I choose peace. I choose the story. I kept wondering how long she had practiced saying those words in her head. If it ever occurred to her what it would feel like when that story finally burned to ash. On the third day, at exactly 6:03 p.m., she texted. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. My office. Not the house. Her office. Neutral ground. Controlled space. Cold. Just like her. I barely slept that night. Not because I was nervous. I had passed that stage a week ago, but because I had no idea what I was walking into. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It wasn't even a negotiation. This was a confrontation with a person I no longer recognized, but who still knew exactly how to twist the knife. I got there early. Sat in the car across the street, watching the sun rise through the fogged windshield. I kept rehearsing my lines, trying to decide if I wanted answers or just acknowledgement. Was I hoping for an apology? Did I want her to beg? To cry? To explain? Or did I just want her to see what she had done, really see it, without her usual armor of justification? At 9:58, I walked in. She was already there, waiting. Hair perfect. Blazer crisp. Phone face down on the table like a quiet power move. The room was empty except for us, a small glass conference room in the corner of her firm's downtown building. We used to meet here for lunch when I worked nearby. Now it felt like a courtroom without a jury. Sit, she said flatly, as if I were late for a performance review. I sat. Didn't speak. Just waited. She took a breath. I know what you found. I said nothing. She continued. The storage unit. The notebook. The photo. All of it. Still, I stayed quiet. I wanted to see how far she'd go without prompting. She blinked slowly, then leaned back in her chair. I didn't think you'd ever go looking. I counted on that. But you've always surprised me, Dorian. Always more persistent than I gave you credit for. I stared at her for a long moment, then finally said the only question that mattered. Who is Beckett's father? She looked away for the first time. I don't know, she said. It could be Coulter. It could be Landon. It could be someone else. I nearly laughed, but it came out like a cough. Someone else. She glanced back at me, expression unreadable. There were mistakes, Dorian. There was chaos. And I didn't want that to follow me into the rest of my life. You were the calm. You were the future. I needed something that wasn't burning down. My mouth went dry. So you used me? I chose you, she snapped. I chose stability. I chose love. Even if it wasn't perfect. Even if it wasn't fair. I leaned forward, hands flat on the table. You let me raise 2 children under a lie. They're not a lie, she hissed. They're real. They're good. And they're yours in every way that matters. No, I said quietly. They're yours. I was the background. The emotional labor. The one who carried the weight while you told stories and made yourself the hero. She didn't deny it. Not once. And then, after a long pause, she said something that didn't make sense. Not at first. I told Beckett the truth because I thought he'd take it better than you. I stared at her. You told him. She nodded slowly. Weeks ago. He asked. He's been asking for years, Dorian. He's not stupid. He saw how different he looked. He saw the questions you never asked. I felt like I'd been punched in the throat. And Maisie, she doesn't know. She won't until she asks. And I swear if you weaponize this against her, I'll destroy you in court. There it was. The threat. The shift from truth to war. I stood. Slowly. Deliberately. You already destroyed me, Mara. But I'm not going to fight you. You know why. She didn't answer. Because that's what you expect. You expect rage. You expect legal games. You want me to lose control so you can play the victim again. But I'm done being a part of your version of the truth. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. You built this life on a fantasy, Mara. One where I was the safe bet. The placeholder. The shield. But I'm not that anymore. And whatever happens next, with the kids, the lawyers, all of it, I won't be the ghost in your story. I'll be the guy who walked away the moment he finally saw it all clearly. She didn't follow me out. She didn't call after me. And for the first time in 12 years, I felt something I hadn't known I was allowed to feel. Free. But freedom wasn't peace. And peace wasn't coming anytime soon. Because what happened next, no one saw coming. It's strange how silence changes after the storm. It's not loud anymore. It's not heavy or suffocating. It becomes something else, gentle, even kind. The kind of silence that wraps around you instead of choking you. The kind that lets you finally exhale. 3 months have passed since that day in Mara's office. I haven't stepped foot in our old house again. My things were delivered by movers. I didn't want to be there when they packed up the pieces of a life that never really belonged to me. I moved into a small rental on the edge of town, nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, no garden, creaky floors. But it's mine, and I'm learning how to breathe in it. The custody situation took a turn I didn't expect. Mara, perhaps out of exhaustion or guilt, agreed to joint custody with no fight. She didn't contest my time with Beckett and Maisie. Maybe she knew that if she pushed, she'd only lose more. Maybe she finally understood that love isn't something you assign, it's something you prove. The first time the kids came to my new place, they ran through the rooms like it was some adventure. I had pizza ready. Movies queued up. They didn't ask any heavy questions. They didn't need to. We just sat on the floor and laughed through a cheesy action film like nothing had ever happened. But the moment I'll never forget came at bedtime. Beckett was brushing his teeth when he peeked out from the bathroom and said, "Hey, you know I still think of you as my dad, right?" I nodded, voice caught in my throat. "Yeah, I know." Then Maisie, already curled up in her sleeping bag in the next room, called out, "You're not like my dad. You were my dad." Duh. They didn't need DNA. They didn't need proof. They just needed me to stay. And I am. For the first time in years, I'm not chasing Mara's approval. I'm not begging for affection. I'm not playing the part of someone else's idea of a man. I'm me. Flawed. Wounded. Still putting myself back together, but finally standing on my own 2 feet. Therapy's helping. Not the kind where someone tells you to be strong or move on, but the kind where someone says that hurt mattered. And it's okay to say that out loud. I'm not ashamed of being emotional anymore. I'm not ashamed that I broke. What matters is that I got back up. As for Mara, I don't hate her. Not anymore. She built a life out of fear and illusion. She thought control would protect her from chaos. It didn't. And in the end, she's the one who has to live with that. I hope she finds peace. I really do. Not for her sake, but for the kids. Coulter never reached out again. Maybe he realized that whatever piece of this story he wanted had already passed him by. Or maybe he understood that the kids didn't need more disruption. Either way, he faded into the background. And I let him. Now I wake up early. I run a little. I make pancakes on Sundays, even when it's just me. I keep a framed drawing on my desk, one Maisie made that says Super Dad in crooked letters with a lopsided cape. I still cry sometimes, but not out of loss, out of gratitude. Because in the middle of all that heartbreak, I learned something no DNA test could ever take away from me. Being a father isn't about blood. It's about presence. And I'm here. For them. And for myself. Finally.